I'm Carys and Matthew.
And I'm Matthew McGregor, and you're listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar.
A weekly look at the stories in the news being overreported and the ones flying completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. My co-host this week is a returning guest, the chief executive of 38 Degrees, former political advisor to various Labour and Democratic politicians, Matthew McGregor.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. If you want to know what Matthew looks like, you can now watch us as well as listen to us on Spotify and Patreon. And to celebrate, there are some billboards promoting the show in London and Manchester over the weekend. And if you're not in London or Manchester, you can just see them on the internet at over_under_pod. Hi, Matthew. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me back. I usually only get invited to these kinds of things once.
No, you're a return guest. Good reviews. Yeah, good reviews. You're back. People want to see you again. How's life? How's life in Manchester?
Pretty good. I was just about to say thank you for having billboards, not just in London. I've been living in Manchester for 5 years now and have quickly become extremely aware of how London-centric this country is. So it's always good when anything is done, not just in London. Obviously, being from Norwich, I would prefer the billboards to be displayed somewhere in Norfolk, but you can't have everything.
Yeah, okay. Next time. Well, Matthew and I have taken a look at the news agenda and we've both picked one story we think the media has gone over the top on, and we've picked one story we think has flown under the radar and not been talked about enough. And I think I'm going to kick us off this week, Matthew. My over the top for the week is advanced vetting. So, okay, just for people who don't automatically find this funny, the latest in what feels like a never-ending series of Peter Mandelson-related scandals began last week, and it's that Peter Mandelson, I mean, this is even contested, but the story that broke was The Guardian had an investigation saying that Peter Mandelson did not pass his advanced security vetting. So the Foreign Office ran some checks on him and he didn't pass them. And the Keir Starmer apparently found this out last week. He promptly fired one of the most senior civil servants in the Foreign Office, Ollie Robbins. And then over the course of the last few days, there's been a he said between Keir Starmer and Ollie Robbins. And it all centers on this incredibly boring, I'm going to say it, procedural things about different levels of vetting and this security vetting. And I feel like we're now all experts in different types of security vetting. I just think it's been too much. Have you followed this story at all, Matthew?
I think it's been impossible not to follow it to some extent. Sometimes there are stories that can be both unbelievable, incredible, shocking, and also completely unsurprising and obvious. And I think anyone who has paid any attention to politics at all over the course of the last 20 years will be scratching their heads and thinking, hang on a second, was it news to anyone that Peter Mandelson was a bit dodgy?
Yeah, and I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head, because there's this is where the kind of world of Westminster and political obsessive, I think, diverges from most of the population. And I happily will say I'm a political obsessive. So I listened to like half a dozen podcasts about this. I went deep on, but I just think, as you say, it's exciting for journalists because, you know, it was a scoop where The Guardian, they've got some investigation. And then all of the political journalists whose whole lives are just about writing out Westminster suddenly like give you charts and they speak to friends who've been vetted and they tell you all about, you know, all these like this weird quango that does loads of vetting and the select committee pores over things and it becomes this expert thing. But yeah, as you say, I think like at its core, it boils down to the thing we knew 1 month ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago, which is Peter Mandelson was not a great pick for American ambassador, to put it mildly. But he was Keir Starmer and number 10's pick, so he got pushed through. And I'm struggling to see what is particularly new about this. We know already that the security briefing had raised issues with his relationship with Epstein. We think that this advanced vetting came down to his many sketchy business interests, which again, you didn't need to be the security services. You could have Googled his lobbying firm. I get why journalists want to pile on and like comb through things, but it doesn't feel super new. And I think there's something quite universal to it, which we can all relate to, which is what I took from this sacked civil servant's testimony on Tuesday, Ollie Robbins, was like, we've all been in a position where our boss wants something to happen. most of us work or have worked in places where there are processes and rules, and we all kind of know the unwritten rule, which is if your boss or someone really senior wants something to happen, the normal rules slightly go out the window.
I think that's totally right. And to some extent, a political system in which political leaders who have been elected and have a mandate should get their way in most circumstances over the views of unelected civil servants whose job is really to serve the wishes of those with a political mandate. But that gets us back to this broader point of, Peter Mandelson was not a great pick to be US ambassador. He wouldn't have been a good pick to do the weekly shop. Do you know what I mean? Because of things that anyone who can use Google or read the newspapers will have had multiple pieces of evidence over the course of the years. And because of the work that I've done over the years, I have been interviewed as part of other people's vetting. So I've worked with people who have then gone on to jobs where they've been vetted, and I've had to do this is mainly actually from the work I've done in America. I've done interviews with FBI agents where they've asked me about people, and they go through these questions and they ask you these most extraordinary questions about people you've worked with. And they're usually it's hard to keep a straight face where they're asking you these questions about people you've worked with and been for drinks with and socialized with, as you do in any workplace. And they're asking you these questions of are you aware of any moments where they've come into contact with known terrorists? And it's kind of well, you shouldn't laugh in those kinds of interviews. You've got to take it seriously.
You can't laugh if the FBI are there, right? You've got
but
to
it's hard not to
face.
Laugh. But conversely, the questions that must have been asked within this process about Peter Mandelson are laughable for another reason, in that he has a well-documented public series of interactions with Russian oligarchs and dodgy businesses and obviously Jeffrey Epstein. So I think that the idea that this is some kind of civil servants have dropped the ball kind of conversation it's obviously not credible.
I mean, I'm really curious about what it's like to have an FBI agent ask you about someone to be vetted. That sounds terrifying and fascinating. But I think the two important things you've hit on that I think are the story and what isn't the story is just the vagaries of vetting and various security processes. And a lot of this is hinged on whether Mandelson failed, whether even a pass fail is possible. But as you say, anyone with access to the internet or anyone old enough to remember politics in previous decades, we didn't know the extent of the Epstein stuff. We didn't know he was hitting forward on emails that should never have been shared outside of government. That's fair. We did know that he had a fairly big lobbying firm that had a lot of clients in countries where maybe we wouldn't want them to be spying on us. And I was remembering I was trying to do what are all these Mandelson scandals? Diane Abbott did quite a good job of reminding everyone in Parliament why Peter Mandelson had been fired twice from ministerial roles. Spoiler alert, normally because of his relationship with a rich person. But the other one I went back into in the, mental archives was, do you remember when Peter Mandelson and George Osborne had Yachtgate and they had this whole beef, which all centered on being in a Russian oligarch's yacht? And it was one of those weird ones where Osborne tried to throw Mandelson under the bus, and then Mandelson, nicknamed the Prince of Darkness, again, we sort of knew who he was, manages to outmaneuver Osborne because it's you can't mess with me. But it all centered around them hanging around on a Russian oligarch's yacht and maybe holiday home in Corfu.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it's borderline silly because it's almost slapstick. This kind of to go back to your point about journalists saying oh my gosh, it's sort of some of the reaction of journalists this week has reminded me of the bar owner in Casablanca. I'm shocked that gambling is happening in this establishment. Most of these journalists have hung out with Peter Mandelson over the years and have been pretty pally with him. And we knew who he was. And the reality of this story is that I think there was a sense, obviously we don't know, but we think there was a sense in Downing Street that this was a price worth paying, a risk worth taking. And it has been shown not to have been the case. And the question now is, what are the consequences for that happening? Now, what we're seeing this week is that discussion happening with evidence. And so that is the difference. I think that is to your question, what are we finding out this week that we didn't know before? What we're finding out is the proof for what we thought. Now we know.
And I guess the decision to fire Ollie Robbins, which I still think was like a pretty bad decision to push someone outside of the tent who can do you a lot of damage. Yeah, it has shed more light, but on things that we sort of knew. Like there was a lot of pressure to get him appointed. He'd sort of been announced before all the vetting had happened. He had access to things. It wasn't that nothing came to light in the Ollie Robbins Select Committee performance, but I think, yeah, I guess we're putting meat on the bones that I think most people knew, something that most people knew didn't pass the sniff test. And so I think it's one of those things where like it's fascinating for lobby journalists and political obsessives, but for most people who maybe just flick through the Metro or listen to the headlines on BBC News, it's just like another reminder of Starmer's terrible judgment in appointing Mandelson. And I don't know that the process, the intricacies, like, you know, we knew that things had been flagged. But the other thing is, the longer this goes on, the more damaging it is for everyone in politics, and especially Keir Starmer. Because I think what it does is just add to this sense of like sleaze and mistrust and like jobs for the boys. Like one thing that I did think was newsy was that this senior civil servant, Ollie Robbins, said that, it wasn't just Mandelson that was in the frame for a diplomatic job. Matthew Doyle, another man who had relationships with a disgraced paedophile. Yeah, I got asked to find him a job in the diplomatic service. And I thought that was a bad bit of info.
All of this is catastrophic for people's trust in politics, and that's the reality of it. Whether you are pro or anti Keir Starmer, I think there are a small number of people that are still pro Keir Starmer, but regardless of your views, this is really, really unhealthy for politics. And I think lots of us were saying the same during Partygate, during the collapse of trust, during Liz Truss's time in charge. These are short-term political gains for one side of politics, depending on your views of who should be up and who should be down. But overall, this is catastrophic for people's trust in politics. And I think that more broadly than that, there is a lack of either understanding or willingness to confront that challenge in Westminster. The reality is, if you want to get people to trust politics again, it's no longer enough to try and deal with these scandals on a case-by-case basis. It's no longer enough to try and decrease the number of times when these scandals happen. People are so put off by politics. Politics is the well has been poisoned, that we need structural change. It's not enough to simply say, we're going to, because of the scandal over freebies, we're going to increase the transparency over freebies and lower the threshold at which this needs to be reported. It's no longer enough. That is one example of many, many, many examples where the change that even reformers in Westminster are trying to push forward is just not enough. It's a day late and a dollar short, given the crisis of confidence that the country has in Westminster. And frankly, I understand why people are so put off. People have fantastic bullshit detectors and they can see what's going on. They don't know the intricacies of everything that's going on. They don't know who Ollie Robbins is or Cat Little or any of these people, and they don't need to. You talk to people and their description of what is happening in Westminster is basically spot on. They're right to be incredibly angry.
The other thing I wanted to say on this, because I don't think, probably I assume you agree with that, I don't think this in itself is a reason for Keir Starmer to go, because I don't think it is a new thing. It's like more light on an already bad thing. And I think he has to resign. I also don't actually think he lied, although I did a very unscientific poll on my social media and I was shocked by, what you're speaking about. The majority of people that did the poll or responded to me said, I just think he's lying. And I thought that was really telling, that just is such a baseline level of mistrust that they're like, yeah, it just stinks. I think it's completely plausible. And it sounds like it is true that Starmer didn't know about the jiggery pokery with Mandelson's vetting. Although, again, credibly, like it's not super shocking that someone with a lot of relationships with like sketchy companies and rich people might have problems with vetting. But I do think the thing that I also just, for me, have taken away is I think Starmer's handled this really badly. And I think he's fallen into a trap that he's fallen into repeatedly with the Mandelson stuff, which is to sort of make himself the victim. And it was just another example of him being like, well, I was lied to. I was deceived. And like, that may be true. But I think as you say, what people are looking for in this moment when they just feel like so much is broken, my life is so hard, and politicians don't seem to want to help or be able to help. I don't think it's just that weird energy of like, bro, no one really cares.
Yeah.
Like,
so I think that is a completely important point, that that's not the actual story here. But I think it also actually is an example that you see at the top of media, cultural institutions, businesses, this kind of notion that good people can't do bad things. I'm a good person, therefore this can be explained or can be justified. And, good people can do bad things, and mistakes have clearly been made. And there are people who have done wrong. And I think the question is, are there going to be consequences for that or not? We won't know. And I think that the Labour Party, or the Parliamentary Labour Party, is in a kind of a stasis until the local elections happen. But I do think this is just incredibly serious, and things will only get worse unless they decide to try and make them better.
Huge thank you to Barnes and Eden, who became paying Patreon supporters this week. Thank you so much for your generosity. This podcast only exists because 350 people choose to pay for it each month. That's it. A few hundred people give a few pounds each month, and we get to make this show for you ad-free. I'll be honest, those 350 people only cover basic production costs. We need more supporters so that the podcast can continue to exist and to grow. If you like Over the Top, Under the Radar, and you want us to keep making it, please become a Patreon supporter today. The Patreon community gets the warm glow of knowing that they helped to make the show, but they also get a bonus episode each week. They get a weekly behind-the-scenes newsletter and access to the Over Under WhatsApp community. Go to patreon.com/Over the Top, Under the Radar to support us. If you support us, it means everyone gets the show every week ad-free, and you'll be supporting independent left-wing media, not beholden to shareholders or billionaire owners.
My Over the Top is the forthcoming World Cup in Canada, Mexico, and the United States, almost entirely in the United States, but Canada and Mexico have got a couple of consolation games. So this is a toxic combination of the world's biggest sporting spectacle. Apologies to any Olympic fans out there, but there's a huge amount of money to be made. And then you add in the involvement of a comically dodgy Bond villain level FIFA, with Infantino helming the ship. Then you add in the fact that the US is currently presided over by Donald Trump. This is a toxic nightmare waiting to happen. And I just thought it would be worth going through just some of the range of over-the-top own goals that they have scored during the course of preparing for this World Cup.
Tell us, teach us. I want to hear them all.
Extortionate prices. Like, football has got really expensive. I'm a supporter of Norwich City, who are in the Championship next year, confident about promotion next year, but prices have gone up and up and up over the course of my lifetime following the game, but they are nothing compared to what we're seeing in the World Cup. Prices starting at $200 after having promised that tickets would be priced around $21. But those $200 tickets are the kind of like right up in the gods.
Nosebleed ones.
Nosebleed tickets.
Oh.
A front row ticket for the United States opening game in the first round against Paraguay is $4,000.
No, it's not $4,000.
Dollars, not pounds, but still.
For an opening game, not for
the opening game, not the final.
Oh,
the opening game, and also not to be partisan about it, but USA and Paraguay are not great teams, so it's not even a good footballing spectacle. Don't write in and complain if you're a United States or Paraguay fan. Secondly, though, it's not just the ticket prices, it's the fan experience. So the United States is set up differently. Like one of the stadiums is in New Jersey. It's an American football stadium usually. it is illegal to walk to the stadium. There are no footpaths to the stadium, so it's illegal to walk to the stadium. You have to use a car. You have to use one of the coaches. I mean, Americans love tailgating. I don't even want to get into talking about tailgating, but it is illegal to walk to the game. And this is just one example of a fan experience that is going to be really, really horrendous. There is also the format of the competitions, way more teams, way more games. The format is absolutely horrendous, but I won't get into that because I'll get all Alan Partridge trying to explain the permutations of how the tournament works. Those are about football, right? But this is also about the politics. Immigration into America, to get into the United States of America. I'm lucky. I've got the privilege of having a United States passport. Going into the United States through border control is not terrifying for me. But being at games, fans being able to go to these games from around the world, from Asia, Africa, Oceania, South America, in the current climate where ICE is running rampant in the country, where people from Muslim majority countries in particular are screened and targeted and harassed. Black and brown people at border control are subject to much more severe harassment than others. And that's before you even get to the fact that some people from some countries are literally just banned from entering the United States. So now we've got the situation with Iran, where the Peace Prize winning president of one participant in the competition is bombing the country of another participant in the country, and Iran's fans are literally not allowed into the United States.
Wait, Iranian fans aren't allowed to come to the game if they aren't already in America?
Exactly
because
right.
Trump is
bombing their country, and we've even had one FIFA official lobbying now to try and kick Iran out of the competition altogether and replace them with a bunch of losers in the Italy team who failed to qualify for the competition again. And so just this whole thing is just overwhelming. And that's the thing for me, is that the World Cup is such a special and important competition for people who love football. You know, I am an England fan, and I desperately want to see at some point in my life England lifting a trophy. I want to care about this competition, but I am overwhelmed by this deluge of horribleness that is coming at us.
It's a really good over, because you're right. There's so much to unpack there. And the sort of, is it an irony or is it just the hypocrisy of the FIFA prize winner? You know, go back to an old episode to hear about how Trump won the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize, probably the only one, is warmongering and won't let the people he's bombing into the country. Yeah, I think it's also like, I think you've hit at the heart of what feels kind of tragic about it, and which is that World Cups, international tournaments can be just so wonderful, right? At their best, even if you don't get a ticket. You know, being in the pub, I support, I support Ghana, Wales, and, you know, occasionally England. Don't at me, my parents. And that thing of like being, you know, summer tournament, you go and watch it in the pub, everyone's like nail biting, screaming, crying, like that amazing collective experience. And it just feels like, you know, there's a lot of money in football already, and it just feels like FIFA really take the cake for just like having to squeeze every lot. Like, they're notoriously corrupt. Like, just Google FIFA corruption and you'll get about 20 scandals to pick from. It's really sketchy who wins, that gets a chance to host the tournament. Money often changes hands, but something about the $4,000 ticket to see a not that exciting game. Also, what are the touts going to do at that price? You can't even ticket tout it. £4,000. Who's got that money? Who's got the money?
It is not a kind of a new thing that football is being taken away from us, but I think we have to continually say and keep coming back to the fact that football is ours. This is a community game invented by communities, particularly working class communities, for those communities, sustained by those communities through good days and bad. And these people want to take it away from us purely so they can fill their own pockets with absurd and obscene amounts of money. And your politics is often downstream of culture. And I think that, you know, not only do we need to call out what is happening at the World Cup, but I also think we need to use what is happening in the World Cup to tell a story about income inequality and the fact that the economy is being run for people that don't have our interests at heart. They have other people's interests in heart. And it's a good opportunity to talk about that and to tell that story and to try and rally people and mobilize people to do something about it.
There's a few angles to why this is awful. And you're right. Politics is downstream of culture. But in this case, politics is potentially interfering with culture with the like, well, let's get rid of Iran and have Italy. Because of whatever Trump's latest geopolitical stance is. But I think you're right. Like it's actually a nice example of how big money interests and kind of just naked, unfettered capitalism kind of ruins it for everyone. Because it's like, who are the people that can afford £4,000 or dollar tickets? They're not going to be good fans. It's going to be like corporate boxes. It's going to be some company that's a sponsor. And then people who work for the company are going to get offered like a free box or free seats. It's going to be super rich people who aren't going to yell and scream and cry and like create the atmosphere that footballers need to play well. So it's just like, it's not just like it's gross and it just profits a few people. It also just kind of kills the vibe, right? Those matches are not going to be fun. Like,
I lived there for a long time, got lots of dear friends. I'm a huge baseball fan, and there are great things about the country. One of those great things is not fan culture in the United States. They are starting from a very, very low point of generating an exciting, passionate, volatile atmosphere. And then you add in exactly that of a bunch of people who rock up in loafers and chinos and want to sip martinis while watching the game. It's not going to be
vibe. That's a bad vibe.
Compare that to the fan atmosphere in the South Africa World Cup. I can still hear the vuvuzelas echoing in my eardrums from 16 years ago.
Yeah, my dad had a vuvuzela when the World Cup was in Germany. His lips were swollen from blowing it. A grown man, just absolute nuisance. Okay, well that's a really good over. My under the radar, we're back to government and civil service, so like a little bit more dry than the wild world of FIFA. My under the radar is Danny Kruger. So for those who don't know, Danny Kruger is a former Conservative MP who defected to Reform in September of last year. So he's one of the Reform defectors. And he was given a role by Nigel Farage on preparing for government. So like, there's a few things about Danny Kruger. We could go into all of it. His mum is Prue Leith of Bake Off fame. He is a former sort of Cameronite Ian Duncan Smith, like he's credited with having written the Hug a Hoodie speech. He's a sort of compassionate conservative or now reform person. So he's a kind of interesting figure. He wrote a book called Covenant. He's got some pretty punchy views on women's rights and abortion that I do not share. But the reason I think he's under the radar at the moment is he has been given this job by Nigel Farage, which is focused on preparing for government. So there are all these various reform spokespeople now who we're always hearing from, Robert Jenrick and Zia Youssef. But Danny Kruger has a non-policy role. His job is to work out how reform can get shit done when they're in government. And I think that Danny Kruger is a really important and interesting figure in British politics. And I think he is flying completely under the radar of journalists at the moment. On the weekend or in the last few days, he gave an interview to the Spectator's Coffee House podcast. So it was like a sit-down interview where he talked about all the things he's been working on. He talked about some pretty sweeping things. So first of all, he wants to make huge redundancies across the civil service. It's currently at 500,000 people. He says that's way too big. There need to be significant cuts. Sort of timely and presciently, he is really big on the idea of having more political appointments and fewer sort of so-called neutral civil servants. So he wants way more SPADs. He wants the SPADs to be able to earn more money. And he wants to completely restructure civil servants' contracts. So the point he makes in the interview is because salaries in Whitehall aren't that good. I mean, depending on where you start from, Danny's an Aldertonian, so I think aren't that good, I think he thinks if you're not bringing home 100K, like it's bad times. But so his point is, civil service salaries aren't that good, but civil service pensions are amazing. But you've got to stay as a civil servant for 30 years. And so then you attract a certain type of person who just wants their pension and maybe isn't super dynamic. And so I don't agree with all of Danny Kruger's politics, but I do think the thing he's working on is really interesting. And I don't think it's inherently left or right wing, because as we've seen this last week and in previous weeks, navigating the civil service and getting your agenda through the various arms of government is a challenge for all political parties. And so I wondered if you, because you like me are a political nerd, sorry to out you, like, have you been following him? Were you aware of it? Like, what's your take on Danny Kruger?
Yeah, I've definitely been following what he's doing, partly for all of the reasons you've outlined, partly because the polls suggest that reform might form the next government. And, I see a lot of echoes in what he's saying with Donald Trump's and the Heritage Foundation's agenda plan. They were very open about what they wanted to do.
That was Project 2025, right? That
Project
thing that
2025, yeah, sorry, not agenda. They were very open about what they wanted to do. And when they came in, they have done lots of those things. And I think we should take Danny Kruger seriously because he's trying to pursue the same path. And that is similar to the Trump approach versus what Labour did in 2024, where they rocked up without really a proper plan, without an idea of what they wanted to do or how they wanted to do it. I always remember a really incredible story, an incredible moment in summer 2024, after Labour had come into office. I was talking to a minister about a policy that 38 Degrees has campaigned on in the past, was in Labour's manifesto. And I was saying, how's that going? Are you going to be doing this thing? And he said, "Oh, the civil servants aren't that keen. They don't think they can make a success of it." And I think that was the first moment where I was kind of like, maybe this isn't going to go. Maybe this isn't going to go quite as. Maybe there's not going to be as much change as the manifesto blaringly said there was going to be.
Yeah.
And like you say, I don't think this is left or right. The machinery of the state is just machinery. A lever that is pulled that does something can be pulled by someone using that for good or for ill. Obviously, I think we can all agree that Reform want to use this machinery of state for very dastardly, unpleasant things that will have huge implications for our country and for people that we love. But we would also want a progressive government who is able to get elected, to be able to make the change that they were elected on the basis of. And so I think it is really interesting. And I don't think we should assume that simply because a Reform supervillain is doing this reordering, that it is inherently wrong. What they want to use it for is inherently wrong.
Yeah, and I think where I ended up on this, having, spent half an hour in Danny Kruger's mind on this podcast, which we'll put in the show notes, is that actually the main thing I think that progressives, left-wing people need is like an opinion on this stuff. Because I think the knee-jerk reaction, and I say this as a, dyed-in-the-wool lefty, is to be like, don't go after public sector workers, like, back the unions, protect their jobs. We don't want to strip back the state. And like, that is my default reaction. My position is it isn't bad to have a big government or people employed in government. But when I went into the detail of the things he was saying, there were some things where I was like, I don't have an opinion on that. And I kind of wish there was someone thinking about this from a left-wing perspective that was like, we want people to be employed and have good jobs, and we don't want to just arbitrarily fire people. But I was like, some of the stuff, yeah, for me, I was like, maybe this would make things work better. So one that I think is a kind of easy is he's really keen on co-locating ministers in one building, which is something I do in New Zealand. So right now, if you're, Secretary of State for Health or, the Chancellor, you have your big building in Whitehall with all your civil servants, as you say, telling you, I don't think you can do that, Minister. And one of his things is he thinks that the cabinet should be, if not just for part of the week, all working in the same building. And stuff like that. I'm like, oh yeah, actually, that seems not evil, supervillain. Maybe we should do that. They have a lot of views on reforming the House of Lords. The stuff on judicial review and judges, I don't like. But yeah, something was like, well, who's our Danny Kruger? Who's sitting thinking about this stuff? Because as you say, when you then get into government, it's important that you can do the how as well as the what. Yeah.
And I think how these things work should be taken seriously by people on the left. I think sometimes there's a view that it's actually all about the policies and the commitment and the willingness to drive things through. Those things are all important, certainly, but we should care about the fact that the Prime Minister takes over after literally 2 hours sleep the day after a general election, has no Department of State other than this sort of rickety old, beautiful building, but like completely unfit for purpose. It's absurd. Is underpowered in terms of their staff. That we had really, really smart, good people not able to go into government because the SPAD salaries were literally not going to cover their mortgage. Obviously, small violins for people who are on above the average wage. But the reality is that people have to make decisions that are right for them and their families. And there is a point at which we say, well, do we want this system to be powered sufficiently to drive through the kind of progressive change that we want to see? Obviously, that's not what Danny Kruger is trying to do. We should take the machinery of state seriously, because it is the mechanism through which we can deliver on those policies that hopefully progressives can get elected on. To my under the radar, I don't know if this is going to be under the radar for others. It's not under the radar for me because these people live inside my head, metaphorically and potentially literally as well. I want to talk about Palantir. If Palantir don't live inside your head, just a kind of a quick summary of them. They are a data and analytics company, which is a description that severely understates the actual impact of these people. It's a data and analytics company, but it's run by extremists, like comic book level baddies who make Bond villains look like very chill guys who you'd like to have a G&T with. Like, these people are really absurdly iffy, and I'll come on to talk in a little bit of detail because I want to talk about them now, because they've just released a manifesto, which is by its definition saying they're quite a bit out loud. But I'll come on to that. I did want to talk about them because of that manifesto. But this morning, the Guardian has revealed that Palantir are in talks with the Met Police to have a potentially £100 million deal with the Met Police. So, as I say, I know this isn't under the radar for everyone. Global Justice Now have been doing some brilliant campaigning on this. The Good Law Project this week have put out a podcast, deep dive into Palantir's contract with the NHS. 30 Degrees has been campaigning, calling them out. So if you're on our email list, you've probably come across them. But for anyone who's not aware, there are kind of two bits to this. Why is this big US tech firm relevant to us, and why should we worry about them? They're relevant to us because the UK government is giving them literally hundreds of millions of pounds. The NHS has a 330 million 7-year contract with the NHS signed in late 2023 to run something called the NHS Federated Data Platform. It's ostensibly an attempt to make data work better within the NHS. Okay, interesting project, but it means that Palantir is accessing, using, and analysing the health data of almost every person in this country. The MOD has a £240 million contract with Palantir, which, by the way, bypassed standard procurement processes to get it signed. And that is to deploy, I'm going to read this to get this right, because we don't talk about the military very often. The contract is to deploy military AI systems for strategic, tactical, and live operational decision-making. In the military context, that's quite a frightening phrase.
So just use AI to do shit in the military without a human being able to
do shit with weapons.
Do shit with weapons. Just do shit with... Don't worry your pretty little heads about it. It's fine. It's fine. We got this.
I absolutely shouldn't laugh, but it's so frightening. You kind of have to laugh at it. And at the same time, one of the things wrong with Palantir is that they are providing these services to the Israeli occupation forces, who have used that kind of technology and the resources of others to carry out a genocide in Gaza. But back in the UK, they are also working with the Financial Conduct Authority, accessing huge amounts of highly sensitive FCA data. Ostensibly, the contract is to track financial crime, a good thing in practice. And then we've got this Met Police contract, which is to automate intelligence analysis for criminal investigation. So, forget about spy cops, as horrific as that scandal was. This is spy robocops. Palantir using data and AI, our data about us, to do these contracts for these businesses. Now, going back to what we were just saying, like machinery, technology, tools, those are things that you can use for good or ill, right? So they're relevant, but why should we be extremely concerned, if not scared? Number one, this company was founded by Peter Thiel,
yep.
who once said, this bears, I'm sure people have heard this, but it bears repeating. He once said, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." There's no nuance in that. There's no like, I wonder what he really means. He's saying what he really means. And there was an amazing moment a couple of months ago where he was asked on a New York Times video podcast, "You'd prefer the human race to endure, right?" Which was then followed by a long period of silence while Peter Thiel was trying to work out how to answer that he sort of wants the human race to endure, but under some circumstances in a sort of a different way to the way that the human race has. I mean, this is like...
He's the kind of super, yes, you say he's super villain territory. Like we've talked about on the show a while ago. He's just like mega rich, pals with Elon Musk, sketchy, like really right-wing politics, like really, like he's JD Vance's big backer. We have him to thank for JD Vance. He's just pumped money into like many political races. And you're right, Palantir is just like, it's textbook bad. It's also like sidebar named after these weird all-seeing devices from the Lord of the Rings. It's sour. Like even the name is like steeped in kind of weird supervillain energy. And you're right. I think it's when I didn't know about the Palantir manifesto until you told me about it, and then I googled it, and I was like, oh, this is like a 10-point evil plan for justifying doing evil things.
Exactly right. And I think if on this podcast you asked me, do you want the human race to endure? I could answer that question really quickly. I wouldn't need to do any research or give it any thought.
Would it be a yes or a no? Just so would be a yes or no. Great. We do want the human. Good to know that, Matthew. Glad you're on the record saying that you want the human race to endure.
I am on balance in favour of the human race enduring. But this manifesto, and I think people should read it. I think people should read the political, philosophical manifesto of a company that controls or has access to data about you. I think whoever is listening to this, it is really unlikely that Palantir hasn't got at least some of your data flowing through its systems. And if not, they are using your taxpayers' money to have that data flow through your systems. And this is a manifesto that talks about how some civilizations, by their nature, are aggressive. They dispute the term ethno-nationalism because they prefer techno-nationalism. These are people who are very happy to say, I mean, this is on their website. They have put it on their Twitter account. It is on their LinkedIn page. They are passionate and proud about the things that they have outlined in this manifesto. And things in this manifesto should really scare anyone who is not in favor of, white supremacy, the West as a superior entity that should control the world's economy, and our future. I think when you talk about Palantir, you can end up sounding a little bit conspiratorial, a little bit like tinfoil hat. Like, all I'd say is, if that's how you feel, read the manifesto and see if you still want hundreds of millions of pounds of our money going to this company.
And like non-competitively, it does kind of bring us back to like the civil service, procurement, these boring things are actually quite important. Like, why, without any competition, are they being handed contracts, money, data, all things I don't want them to have of mine? I don't want them to have my tax money. I don't want them to have my data. You're right, they probably already do. And like, why has that been waved through? And I think it's also important because like we're in this moment. I don't know how long the moment will last, but it's happening in a lot of countries, to a lot of people, where there are a set of people who are very compelling and they have a very simple message, which is your life is harder because of immigrants. In particular, your life is harder because of Black and brown people, mostly men, military-age men, coming over illegally, taking your resources. They are to blame. Everything that is hard boils down to these people coming here, having an easy run of it, maybe being here illegally. And like, that story is very compelling. It is being told to us by lots of different people with deep pockets and access to big media outlets. And there's another story, which is that a small number of companies and rich people have stitched up the system so that they can get richer and extract more and more from us, and we get less and less. And like, I don't think you can counter Reform's narrative, Trump's narrative, unless you explain who the baddies are. Like, if immigrants aren't the baddies, if they aren't to blame, who is to blame? And it's like, there are actual baddies. Palantir is a baddie. It's not that complicated. It's not that nuanced. We don't want this company in our public sector. We don't want to be giving it money. And I think until we're able to talk about the baddies and name the baddies, we can't tell a different story about the country that we want, about the world that we want. So I think it's a really important one. And it is so frustrating how little attention Palantir gets. There's a great 38 Degrees campaign, which we can link to, but like there's not, the Guardian will reliably write an article about stuff, but we don't get a ton more cut through. And Peter Thiel's fingers are in all the pies. Like he's good pals with the guy that's just bought the Daily Telegraph. He's good pals with Elon Musk. Like he's very good pals with JD Vance. Like he's everywhere. And I don't think we could talk about it too much, really.
No, I don't think we can. And I think this is a broader problem about big tech in that we're delegating our ability to do things that are important to the state. It is important that data is used better to detect illnesses and to diagnose and to keep people safe. Those are not implicitly the wrong things for a country to do. But by giving away power, whether it's to Palantir or other big US tech firms, we're giving away power. We're not just giving away money and control over data, but we're also giving away power. You've seen how some of the tech firms have reacted to attempts to regulate them. If WhatsApp said, unless the government does X, Y, and Z, we're turning WhatsApp off, it would have a significantly meaningful impact on people's ability to communicate with each other. We could probably figure it out over time, but that is a power that company has over us. Palantir is a particularly acute threat, but there are others as well. And I think it's a real worry that the BBC is not investing in developing an AI that we can have sovereign control over, and we're relying on American companies to not go evil. I think that we've seen enough evidence now that we cannot rely on big US tech firms or other tech firms from around other countries to not go evil, because they very often do.
Yeah. And as you say, it's built in. They're trying to maximize their profit margin, our attention. Like they aren't interested in amazing health outcomes for people in the UK. And like, that's a problem. That means that what they build and what they do won't benefit us. Really good under. We can't talk too much about Palantir. Thank you so much for coming on, Matthew. Where can people find you, 38 Degrees, if they want to know more?
38degrees.org.uk. You can sign up for our campaigns. We send emails about a whole range of issues. We've got people supporting us from across the country, more than 1,000 supporters in every single constituency of the country. And we campaign on the NHS, big tech, public safety. If you're interested in politics, there's going to be something for you on the 38 Degrees website and in our community.
If you want to hear more of Matthew and I's conversation, you need to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/overthetop under the radar, and you can hear the rest of this amazing conversation.